Okay. Natural organic reduction, human composting, and also aquamation. And so we're going to get the goods, and he generously offered to come up to do something similar here at Evergreen, at Beth Evergreen, down from up from Lafayette. It's about a snowy day. Yes. So we definitely wanted to take him up on that. Really thrilled to have such good showing on Zoom, and I can understand if you're staying put on a snowy day. And I'll turn it right over. This is part of our series of, I think it's number 6 of our Taboo Topics series of, trying to broach conversations that would otherwise be maybe, we'd be hesitant to engage. This is obviously anything related to death in our culture might be considered a taboo topic. And in Jewish tradition as well, there's a pretty strong sort of thrust of Jewish tradition that talks about burial as being the traditional way of doing of attending to bodies after death. And so providing options and alternatives to that creates a dynamic in for a nice little lively controversy or machloket, we say, healthy discussion within the Jewish community. So those are 2 dimensions in which that fits with the topic. And I'm sure, Dan would welcome questions throughout. You can unmute, and I'll also try to monitor the chat as well. So if you have questions for Dan throughout, and feel free to jump in.
For sure, yes. So hi everyone. Hi everyone in person. My name is Dan Ziskin, and I didn't realize this was going to be a taboo topic, which is exciting for me. I love hard problems, hard puzzles, and being able to unravel this in a Jewish context is exciting for me. Let's put it that way. So I brought this slideshow, and we can run through it, and or we can also, at the end, we can just break for a regular conversation. And I really am open to being interrupted for questions or along the way. So I was born in New Jersey. We were just talking about that now. And I grew up in a Reform household. My parents were physicians and sort of science oriented. And so religion was not a big part of how I grew up, but I went to Israel after college and had some kind of transformation. So my Judaism comes and goes along the way. I got an education in physics. I got a PhD in 1993. My dissertation was about how clouds affect the Earth's climate. And after I graduated, I had a career as a data science person managing satellite data for observations of the Earth and at various archives at NASA and NOAA. And now currently I'm at NCAR. I still work there half-time as a data manager for a satellite. I'm in 2016, I was having tea with a friend of mine who I knew was interested in death. She had a nonprofit and served families in the Boulder area. And she was telling me about how Boulder really needed an eco-funeral home. She was sort of, as a nonprofit, was working with these families. And then at the end of her ability to help, they would have to hand off the body to a conventional funeral home, and the families would be let down, and the funeral homes got to charge these big invoices and left her out of it. And I've always been a passionate environmentalist. I've also been very motivated in how can I be helpful? How can I really help? And when she said Boulder needs a eco funeral home, I thought I could do both, help people and be an environmentalist at the same time every day. And so I said, like, let's do it. We founded the Natural Funeral in 2016. In 2019, March of 2019, March 1st of 2019, exactly 4 years ago, we opened our doors in Lafayette. And you guys are totally 100% invited anytime to come visit. We are also about to open in the next few weeks an office in Loveland. And so we're expanding. And we are a full service funeral home. We serve the entire state of Colorado. The funeral industry is regulated state by state. So just because we're in Lafayette, we can reach out and we serve people in Durango, we serve people in all the corners of the state, and people also bring bodies to us, and that's allowed. And once they bring bodies to us, we can serve them. Well, but we can't reach out and cross state lines and practice as a funeral home in other states, not yet. We do almost anything a natural, a conventional funeral home could do for you, except we do not embalm. That's kind of where we draw the line. And so even though that's like an absolute, we don't do it, of course, every rule has an exception. And we've never done it, but there's times where it's absolutely necessary. And we will help a family by referring them to another funeral home that does embalming. We just like Judaism, it stands on the 3 pillars, Torah and service and acts of loving kindness. Well, we also stand on what we say are 3 pillars of the environment. Environmentalism is one of our core values. Community engagement is one of our core values. And coming up here and seeing your beautiful synagogue is an example of community engagement that we are not just waiting for you to come to us. We want to meet you where you're at. And also empowering families. Whatever, we have a very open mind about what's possible, and we'd like to find out where you see a great service living and meeting and providing that for you. Like to think of us having a very like sort of thin veneer of our stuff doesn't get in the way of you honoring your families. So here's what I call the parts of serving a family. And as simple as this slide looks, it's extraordinarily misunderstood. And so I'm going to unpack it a little bit. I see serving a family as having 3 parts. One is the planning, and one is then that leads to the next stage, which is what I call the farewell. And the farewell is everything between when somebody actually dies to when they're actually, their body is in a permanent resting place. And this disposition is the technical term for what that final place looks like. So I'll start with this disposition, just for clarification. The state of Colorado says there's only like 5 or 6 different things that can count as a disposition. One of them is burial, one of them is cremation, there's freezing, there's leaving the state. There's that counts from the state's point of view, that's permanent and the body leaves. There's donation to science, there's and then there's things like the newer ones, which are the alkaline hydrolysis, and I'll talk quite a bit about that. And there's natural organic reduction, which we'll talk quite a bit about. And those are, like, there's a short list, and the state says this is what has to happen, and it has to happen in about 30 days after death at the maximum. There's the planning stage. So I'm going to skip to the farewell. The planning is, the explaining to the funeral home what we want to happen when somebody dies. What should be, here are the songs I want played, here's the songs I don't want played, who should be in charge of things. And some people think that, and this is why I meant, like, this has to be kind of explained a little bit. Some people think that it's all spelled out in the will. And it's
so you're aware, and this is great. One of our previous topics was meeting with the death doula
wonderful.
and talking about 5 wishes and other ways of doing planning. So not
Yes.
everybody was at that session for sure. So it's worth summarizing, but this community
Yeah.
has had some context in that.
That is so awesome that was another one of your guests. And we work very closely with death doulas because we see an incredible service to the family as that handoff. The death doula brings the person leaving and the whole family constellation to the threshold. And once they pass, then there's a handoff. And we work with hospices, we work with death doulas. And it's a very key part of the planning. And as I was going to say, is people think that the information is in the will, or if they have a will, then it's all taken care of. But frequently the will gets read like a month after somebody dies, and all the planning needs to happen a lot more immediately. So in the farewell, that's where I feel like Judaism tends to focus. And the natural funeral also has a lot to say about the farewell. And we do things like Reverent Body Care, which we talked about when your Hefer Kadisha came to visit. It's like Tahara. We'll talk about the differences, and we talk about in these farewells. There's maybe a memorial service. Sometimes there's viewings. There's those kinds of activities. There's arrangements. And in those tragic situations where there's an unexpected death, like an overdose or a suicide, then often the farewell happens before the planning. And it's a jumble at that time. And that's where there's very sad conversations about the planning after the person's already left. Whereas sometimes the planning sessions, when we're talking about things that are going to happen way in advance, they're often with a clear mind, they're often funny, joyful, giving gifts to the family because you're saying I'm giving them the gift of not having to worry about so as I mentioned, Judaism does tend to focus on the farewell with some ritualized procedures like tahara, washing the body thoroughly, shmira, guarding the body so that it does not involve any pagan activity or that the soul is left unattended. Then there's a reading of Psalms and other types of sacred readings and prayers. And in Judaism convention, like the customary that the body is going to burial immediately. And there's very prescribed ways that this burial is going to occur. And right now there's a very strong sentiment in observant circles that cremation is a particularly sinful practice and it's not suitable for a Jewish disposition. And yet many Jews choose it regardless. But that's one of the controversies that people are experiencing right now. And also, there's ritualized mourning in Judaism, which, the 30 days and the 60 days and the 1 year and these types and the Shiva, of course. And I'm not going to talk about that at all, except that that's part of our tradition. And people have found it healing through the generations. So what about like the current landscape in American culture? Not necessarily Jewish, but in our secular world. So the motif in most funeral homes, it tends to be gloomy. They have this iconography of the raven sitting on the wrought iron gate, and the dark black velvet curtains, and the hearses, and the three-piece suits. There's often in these conventional funeral homes, there's only two offerings of disposition. Do you want to be buried or do you want to be cremated? And the burial is very overwrought. There's fancy caskets and mountains of flowers and things like that. The funeral industry,
Not necessarily the most environmentally friendly.
no,
methods.
exactly. And in fact, I can tell that these flowers come from Chile. But teasing. It's an extraordinary how much material goes into the conventional casket itself per se. And then also the funeral industry itself has a terrible reputation of being predatory and materialistic and taking advantage of people at a time when they are most vulnerable. And that, for sure, some of that is quite well earned. I would like to think that we are transforming that industry and hopefully salvaging the reputation. People have their own opinions, so I'll leave that there. Another characteristic of conventional funerals is this one size fits all. Like we have a product, take it or leave it. And I think that that's not really serving American culture very much. There's also very heavy religious overtones in American culture around that of, are you going to heaven or hell, or is you have to be right with God, and so confess your sins, and angels and demons and things like that. That there's a very sort of a lot of people's old-fashioned views of religion are brought up in the American funeral. And I don't mean to, if people can believe whatever they want. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that a lot of times it's the funeral home that brings that to the family, whether they are bringing it, whether they hold that as a value or not. So how are we different? We have what we call Reverent Body Care, which is exactly like Tahara, but totally different. And we'll get to some of those contrasts later. And we have all these different disposition options. Flame cremation is a conventional, and green burial, water cremation, body composting. We have and these are the four that are mainly, but we also do things like, if you wanted to be buried on private land, we would facilitate that, and that's legal in Colorado. So you don't have to be in a cemetery. If you have a big enough land, we can work with you here. We can do a funeral pyre outside, maybe not in the mountains in August, but depending on the fire marshal's permission, we have done it in Boulder County, and so these are sort of the out of the box thinking that we're trying to do. Lots of people come to the natural funeral and say, I want, for my son wants a Viking funeral. He wants to be put out on the pond and shoot flaming arrows at the boat. We would love to provide that. It's totally against EPA regulations in the Clean Water Act. But I'm working on what could we do instead that would like that do that. And we focus on beauty and simplicity and a lot less stuff. So this is a picture of our chapel. Yes, there's lots of flowers and stuff. That's if a family wishes that, that's what we provide. But there's a simplicity. It's plain walls. We have no religious iconography. We have it's very sparse. And people say, well, what's a green funeral home? What's an eco funeral home? What do you do that makes you green? And sometimes the answer is very resounding. It's what we don't do. It's what we don't fill up the service with extra stuff. And so we tend to also, the mood that we try and create is that when people come to us, that we're really looking forward to, how can we shine light on the loss and move you past that towards healing? And we're not really focused on the gloomy pain of the loss. What we realize that we have no idea what the person is going through. Each loss is kind of unique, and we don't pretend to know. We let the family come and bring their journey to us. So now here's what I was talking about, like Reverent Body Care versus Tahara. One thing that, these are just some of 4 of the things that came to mind for me as the differences, is that Tahara is very structured. It's very much like we will do this and then we'll do that and we will say these prayers and this is how it looks. Whereas Reverent Body Care is very much what the family wants and how they want to act. And they participate in their own way. And if they want to sing songs, if they want to tell stories, all of that is welcome. If they want to brush the hair or wash the feet, these are all things that they do. Or if they bring clothes and we dress them in what the family wants the body to be dressed in, and we invite the participation. Who participates, it's not the Hever Kadisha and men do men and women do women. It's whoever the immediate family is inviting to participate. And it can also be like in phases, where if first it's a husband saying goodbye to his wife, and then the children are brought in, and then the best friends are brought in, and then the cousins, and there could be an expanding circle of intimacy around this process. The primary beneficiary, I'd say in traditional Judaism, from what I understand, it's really like kavod hamet, honoring the body and giving the body the appropriate farewell. Whereas with Reverent Body Care, we focus more on the who's in the room and the participants that are there, rather than the body per se. We don't know, maybe the soul, the neshama is present and is benefiting from it. We can't say, or I can't say, but that's our secondary concern. It's more important that the participants are receiving the closure and the healing from this process. Hygiene, in Tahara, there's lots of 3 buckets of water, cleansing, scrubbing under the nails, thoroughness, everything is exposed. And whereas in Reverent Body Care, it's a lot more of a ritual washing. And if they just want to do the hands, if they just want to put oil on the forehead, that's also just fine. So it's ritualized, and it's not thorough, and it's non-hygienic in the sense that we're not trying to get the body clean in the same way that the Tahara works. So now I'm going to go to these newer forms of disposition. Water cremation was invented about over 100 years ago as a way for farmers to return the nutrients of their dead livestock back to their crops. And the technical term is alkaline hydrolysis because it's a very basic solution. it's potassium hydroxide, and the pH is about 14 for all the chemists in the room, and it's put in with a warm bath and gently rocked, and it takes about several hours. And what happens at the end of that several hours is the body is separated into sort of two parts, two components. One is like bone fragments. It's kind of a powder, and it's more powdery and less cindery if you've ever seen ashes from a flame cremation. So it's like a flower that you'd make a Hamantaschen with. And don't. And then I was wondering, how can I connect this sort to Purim? And then
Appropriately dark humor.
and then there's also this liquid, and it's about 20 gallons. It's a lot of liquid, and it's a very potent fertilizer for plants. Very high in potassium from the potassium hydroxide, but if it's diluted appropriately, it's identified as a biostimulant, and it can be spread out on gardens or fields or tree farms or flower farms, sod. It's not recommended that it's on food crops, but the state regulates the funeral homes. We are not allowed to use it on food crops, nor were we allowed to sell it. But once we give it back to a family, if they choose to take it, the state doesn't regulate what you do with it. So you could do anything you choose with it. Spread it on land or whatever, flower gardens. So alkaline hydrolysis is legal in about 28 states. And it's gaining popularity. We see it growing at about 10% a year in popularity. Like I said, it was invented about 100 years ago, became legal in Colorado about 10 years ago, and about 2 or 3 years ago, we did the very first human body in Colorado. The Natural Funeral was a pioneer. We went to a woman's home in Jamestown, and she said, I want to be compost. And this is before body composting. And so we said, okay, well, we have alkaline hydrolysis. Why don't we do this for you? And then we can spread your body on this land that you love. And so that happened in the summer of 2020.
And the family can take, you said a certain number.
Yeah, as much as they want.
As much as they
We usually typically it's in just like a 8-ounce jar. That goes a long way. But they could get all say 20 gallons, which is, that's a lot of liquid.
What do you do with it if you get?
We donate it to flower farms.
How
They
neat.
took it, or there's a animal sanctuary in Wyoming. We took it up there and they spread it on their pasture.
Great, that's awesome.
So now body composting. This is brand new. Just became legal in Colorado in September of 2021 or so. And we were the first ones to perform it in Colorado. We had, it became legal, and 2 weeks later we had a family who lost their son tragically to an accidental death. And this is what they wanted. And his name was Joey, and the parents were like, Joey would have loved the idea that he was the first one. And it was very touching that we were able to perform this work for them. What happens is that you take the body and we put it in a vessel. We'll see pictures of that later. We call the vessel a chrysalis, both for its symbolic meaning, where the butterfly is transformed in the chrysalis, its body is transformed through it, and also the guy that designed it, his name was Chris. So we put in bulking agents, which are straw, wood chips, alfalfa, other organic materials, and what's called a biochar, which is a tea that has activated enzymes and microbes that also go in to stimulate the composting process. It's sealed with and we pump air in, and then we watch the temperature, and the temperature rises quite rapidly and gets pretty hot in a sealed composting vessel as the process, the microbes are activated. And after it's above about 130 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days, that's considered hygienic, that the pathogens have been rendered inert through that sustained heating over a certain amount of time. And then there's a mixing, and the mixing cools down the compost at first, and then it ramps up again, and then we do it again, and then we do it again 3 times. We roll the vessel, and then after about and this takes a process of several months, and then we take the soil out of the chrysalis, we put it in a curing bin, and we let it sit for about another month or 2. And this allows the compost to mature. There's like an outgassing of ammonia, and it becomes a much more agriculturally useful product. And the same thing applies to this soil, where we are not allowed to sell it. We're not allowed to grow food in it. We give as much back to the family as they wish. The state doesn't regulate what the family does with it, only what we do. And we donate it again to those flower farms. And there's a cemetery in southern Colorado called the Colorado Burial Preserve. It's a natural area that it's conservation land. They bought it, and they also happen to allow burial of human bodies. So it's really land that's being in the process of being reclaimed and restored. And that's where they also extract some of the soil for as part of the restoration process. So why would people do body composting? One is that I consider it an extremely gentle and humane treatment of a human body. They're here. They are, after process of several months, now they're back, returned to the cycle of life. And I want to show you this graph, and I'm glad that we were able to participate in the Zoom so that people at home can see this graph. I'm a scientist, and this is my work. It's still in draft form. I'm going to submit it for publication very soon, where we have different forms of disposition and the carbon emissions associated with them. And so you can see the first 2 in orange are conventional burial and flame cremation, and they're high. And most of the conventional burial, almost half of it, is that overwrought casket that I spoke about. Sometimes it's titanium, sometimes it's teak and mahogany, sometimes it's and it can weigh tons. It's not tons, but they're big. And so you're taking all this stuff, and the carbon emission footprint of creating this object and then burying it has a very large footprint. The blue are the intermediates. Steps 1, the first one is alkaline hydrolysis. That's the water cremation. And this is there's lots of different manufacturers of this device. This is specific to the one that I'm familiar with. So the other others would use different chemicals and different times and things like that. So this is the one I know. The most of the carbon footprint from there is in the manufacturing of these chemicals that are put in. potassium hydroxide, ethyl alcohol, glacial acetic acid. These are and green burial also has a negative footprint. How could you have a negative carbon footprint? Because the inputs are minimized, but you're taking organic matter and burying it, sequestering it. And so that's taking carbon out of the air to grow the pine trees, to make the casket, and sequestering it into the soil. And so that creates a negative impact. And with natural reduction, it's even more so, because now you have the bulking agents and the body, and you don't have the carbon inputs to create a casket. So it has all the positives plus the bulking agents without the negatives. And so it could offset, two cremations, say. And this is a picture of a chrysalis at one of the farms that we work with, where there was an outdoor ceremony, where they had a laying in ceremony, where the body was brought and put into this chrysalis with the organic material, and they had a ceremony like a burial, like a graveside burial, but in this carriage, say. And then after everyone left, put on a truck, strapped it down, don't forget that, and then drove it back to our facility in Arvada, where the actual composting occurs. I call this picture the hidden dog picture, because there's this dog here, but if you can see right there next to that tree is another dog. And so that's the hidden dog picture. So now the big question is, does natural organic reduction the terms, so body composting is what the Natural Funeral calls it. The state of Colorado calls it natural reduction. Every other state that is legal in, which is about 5 or 6 other ones, call it natural organic reduction. So I use all those terms kind of interchangeable. Someday we might petition the state of Colorado to get back in line with everyone else, call it natural organic reduction. So is this good for the Jews? Is it kosher? Is it appropriate? Well, for one thing, all of the pre-funeral rituals, like the tahara and the shmira, all of that can actually be performed just like a regular burial. And all of those time restrictions of, can it happen right away? Can the burial happen right away? Could it, if it needs to, can it be timed appropriately with the holidays or the Sabbath? Yes, all of those things are just as possible with natural organic reduction as it is with burial. If anything, maybe even more flexible. And then does it like in continuity with Jewish tradition and respect for the body and things like that? Does it fulfill this idea of dust to dust, as opposed to like flame cremation, where it's human body becomes ashes, it's transformed? This is much more, I think, consistent with that process of what a human body should become. And it's very similar to what happens in the ground. It's a little different, because in the ground it might take a long time depending on soil moisture and microbial activity and insects and things like that. There's no insects in our process at all. And it's much more of a controlled situation, and it's somewhat faster. We can go a little faster than if the body's just buried in the ground. The Jewish treatment of the bones, and I have that as a question mark. In natural reduction, or in Judaism, the bones are still sacred. Like they're still sort of connected to the person. In natural organic reduction, after several months, the bones are separate from the body, has mostly decomposed, almost entirely decomposed. We take the bones out and we crush them and put the powder back in, the fragments back in with this. And if anything, in my opinion, would make this unkosher, it's that process of the accelerating the process by taking the bones out. There's two ways I can see around it. One would be to just let the process go for longer. But maybe it takes a year instead of 2 months or 3 months. Or once the bones are exposed, there are certain bacteria that can be added that are specialists at dissolving the bones. That's a possibility. Another is, and this rumor where I mentioned that the state of Colorado has, you have this is your disposition. It's either this, and this, and this. What if there was a hybrid? What if there was, we do compost the body, we take the bones out, and the bones are given a Jewish burial. And that would be sort of it might count as a burial, as a disposition, although it would be delayed several months, and the body would go through this transformative process ahead of time. So I'm thinking about ways of doing this. And I have here something that's from an article published from Milan University in Israel in 2010. And they're talking about what they used to do in Talmudic times. That they would take these shallow graves, and here's an archaeological dig of these, and they would let the bodies decompose in these shallow graves for a year. Then they would take the bones out and give them a ritual burial. And that was considered the way that the Jewish burials occurred in Talmudic times. And I feel like what we are doing is more similar to that than and so I'm looking for sort of a way of integrating this new form of disposition into Jewish practice in modern day. I'm not sure whether I'm ever going to get there, but I see it's possible. And then, there's this kind of an article that was a commentary that was written by the Catholic Church that said, composting, that's great for eggshells and banana peels, but not good for human bodies. And that quote shows up a lot in people's criticism of natural organic reduction. And I feel like that's a very unfair, it's glib, and it's kind of like, well, yes, composting is, you put food scraps, compost for sure. That doesn't mean that it's not suitable for bodies, right? Because we bury trash, we bury compost. Doesn't mean that burial is not suitable for human beings either. Like it was a cute one-liner, but I feel like it shouldn't be the last word on this topic. So anyway, that's the end of my presentation, and I would love to hear your impressions and opinions, and it's okay. We can let it get as hot as you want.
What about organ donation?
That's a great question. Organ donation would be perfectly acceptable or allowed before the body composting, but we would compensate for the organs being missing. If, like, let's say somebody was missing their lungs or their spleen or whatever got taken out, we would maybe put in more water or something like that. And it might take a little bit longer for the process. Because there's less fuel for the microbes. But it's the only thing that wouldn't work is if somebody's body was embalmed. That would negate the whole process.
Yeah, what happens to the teeth and the skull? And
That
I guess you have the part that was composted, you have to dump out somewhere. But then you got all these bones and stuff.
And if you could repeat the question, because they.
Oh, okay. So what happens to the teeth and bones and also like things like the artificial hips and the breast implants and those kinds of things? They are all starting the composting process with the body. And then at a certain point, we put the material through a filter, like a kind of like the archaeologist did. A sift, yes. We sift it, and all of the things are separated and separated out. And the metals go to a precious metal recycling, and the other things go to get reduced and added back in to the compost.
So, again, thank you for this. And one of the things that excites me about these additional options is, people have expressed not wanting to take up more real estate in a burial, and
Yeah.
right, and might not be, drawn to fire cremation, but it's the least expensive or the most expedient way of, and so many people do it by default, and not really choosing it, but defaulting into it, and providing alternatives for especially fire cremation is particularly exciting to me,
Yeah.
both for the environmental reasons and in terms of Jewish tradition. We're, by the way, a mixed group. There are non-Jews in this assembly, just to be mindful of that too. And you had talked about the water cremation taking about a couple hours, and then you have essentially like aquamains. You described them as?
Yes, it's kind of like I said, it's powdery.
And then water. So you could potentially bury the aquamains, the
Yes.
powdery substance that could go into hamantasha. Right.
I know.
That's great. You're in the right company. Yeah. So for those who are, I find it compelling to have some burial marker and a place for future generations to visit, to pass on legacies.
Yes.
And that seems like a compelling tradition, and which can be done both with natural organic reduction or natural reduction, the human composting, or the aquamains potentially. And then you have the water, this solution that can be added. How long is the process? And when we spoke a few years ago, you were in the process of composting your first body.
Yeah.
So you didn't know quite how long, it was a couple months.
That's right. And we had that laying in ceremony on the fall equinox, September 21st. And then we had a big ceremony, a big hoo-ha, where we released the regenerative living soil, as we call it, at the Colorado Burial Preserve, which is that natural burial place that I mentioned, on the spring equinox. So exactly 6 months later. And we found that that's about the right time to guarantee that will be done. But it typically takes much less time. And we are always looking for ways of speeding the process up, making it more efficient. So there's exciting changes ahead, but for now, I'd say 6 months is the outside envelope.
And is the regenerative living soil just dispersed over the whole land? Is it like kind of in a spot that they're putting it in?
In this particular case, they put it in a very specific spot, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's they mixed in native grass seeds to it and spread it out at an area maybe about the size of this room.
What are the costs for that? For the,
Yeah, it's just going back to something I wanted to say about the flame cremation. That is also very appealing to people because it's the least expensive. It's the sort of the quickest and easiest and least expensive. And our prices start at $2,400 for the flame cremation, and then $3,200 for burial, and then there's an extra plot, the plot for that. So that can be another few thousand depending on where they are. And then alkaline hydrolysis is $3,900, and our body composting right now is $7,900. And these, right, so it is significantly more expensive. And basically that price is because you're renting warehouse space from us for 6 months, and we have to turn the thing, like, it's not just a one and done. It requires maintenance over time, and so it's an expensive process for us to perform. That I think will change as we get faster at it, and more automated. There'll be ways of saving costs and providing it to people for less. So that's where we're trying to create that.
Guess who does the turning and the composting and the adding the soil and
It's our staff. And it's in a warehouse in Arvada.
I have a question for you. Why was embalming ever, why did they start doing that to dead bodies? I mean, it just seems to, would be the natural way would be just to, put them in the ground and let nature take care of it.
Yeah.
And I don't understand what the thought process was, unless they were trying to make it last for.
It's a great question, and it was invented in the Civil War. The Yankee soldiers were dying down in the South, and the families up north wanted the bodies brought back. So it was invented then, and then it became popularized because they embalmed President Lincoln's body, and they took him on a whole train ride around the country. So why did it spread into popular culture? Why, like, it became this thing? Remember before when I was talking about the bad reputation of the funeral industry? I'm thinking this is an example of how somebody saw a way of selling people something they didn't need. So.
There's a question on the Zoom from Joan and Steve. Can the aquamains be put into a lake, river, or ocean?
The short answer is no, because the Clean Water Act says that you can't put anything into, you can't even put distilled water into a river or a lake. However, it's perfectly safe, non-toxic, sterile. There's no DNA in it. And I'm going to tell you that we have a don't ask, don't tell policy about what you do with it. So is it safe? Yes, I can say, is it safe? Are you allowed? The formal answer is no.
Any other questions on Zoom? Yeah, Irv, go ahead. Just unmute. Yeah. Marilyn's on her way to help you out, I think.
It's too cute. Do you have any doulas that you, like when people come to you? You do?
We
Okay.
do, and we actually, one of our what we call our funeral directors, our word for it is holistic funeral coordinators. One of them is a doula and kind of like works with us part-time, but her real practice is as a doula. And she came to us wanting to see what the other side of that handoff looked like.
Mhm.
And she was so good at it that now she's on both sides of the fence.
Oh, that's great.
And this is a little personal sharing is I'm working with a death doula right now with my mom. She's sort of a distraught widow. I lost my father recently, and she's upset and like, why did he go and leave me here? And I hired a death doula to work with her family. And so I'm a very strong advocate of them helping families at this stage.
We've been, one of the things we spoke about when we spoke to Cindy Kaufman, who's written the book, you know.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So she's a member of the congregation and part of Reverent Kadisha about expanding the role of the Kadisha into that arena, so that the community can participate in that kind of support for families during end of life.
And I think she attended that ceremony where we had the laying out.
Yes, at the reserve, yeah, she mentioned. Irv, do you have your question you want to?
Is it, the only,
Oh,
there's this but are we the only company doing this?
and we're not hearing you, but it may be because did she test that?
No, there it is.
Well, I'll answer the question of, are we the only company doing this in Colorado? The short answer is we are the only company doing this in Colorado, in the natural organic reduction, the compost in Colorado. Although another company plans to open here soon called Recompose. And they are from Washington State, Seattle area. And they're the ones that have the honeycomb model of which is beautiful. And they are, I'd like to think of them not as our competition. I feel like we are, our real competition is obscurity. And so the more people that are talking about it, the more normal it is, the sooner it will be part of widespread adoption. So we welcome them to come in. There is another company that does alkaline hydrolysis called Be a Tree, and they're in downtown Denver. And again, very wonderful company. We work with them, and
you're also contracting with Feldman's, right? Because Feldman's is now.
yes,
You can make arrangements through the your funeral home. If
yes,
you want natural organic reduction or cremation,
that's right.
they would have you.
We invite any funeral homes to work with us, and that they would bring their clients to us. We would perform the service, and then they would be the interface with their families. And Jim Feldman Jim Cohen of Feldman is a huge supporter and has brought many bodies to us.
All right, I think, Irv, we fixed the sound. Go ahead.
Maybe not.
Oh, maybe it's their microphone.
I think on Marilyn's computer.
Carol, did you have a question, or were you?
I did wonder with the composting, you said there aren't insects involved.
Oh, no, there are no insects, and just, but whereas in burial there are.
Okay, so the decomposition just happens with microorganisms
Exactly, yes.
that are in the body already, or are they in the materials also?
Right.
Okay.
And again, that's where that prolonged heating of the where several days at a very hot temperature kills all the pathogens, but would also kill any of the insect eggs and things like that that may have been introduced accidentally.
You mentioned venting
Venting?
Yeah,
of the gases.
we do put air in, like we have like a little aquarium air pump and inject air in and collect it at the top and then put that through an air filter. So before it's released out the ceiling, the roof. And then the cost.
Yeah, sure.
So
I'll try to again, repeat the question. So.
yeah, what about the cost of composting compared to the cost of cremation? And I mentioned cremation is the quickest and easiest and least expensive. That our cost for that is $2,400, and our cost for body composting at this point is $7,900, which is obviously a lot more expensive, but it's also a lot more involved, labor intensive for us. And that's comparable or less expensive to the cost of a burial if you had to go buy a funeral plot and work with a funeral home.
And you said that you have worked with Feldman's before. What part of the process do they do before the body is turned over to you?
Almost everything.
Okay.
They will just work with a family from beginning to end, up until the point where that disposition occurs, and then they just transport the body to us. We perform the service, and then whatever remains the family is asking for, we bring back to Feldman's.
Mhm.
And so it's really almost exclusively their client, and we work business to business as just a service provider.
What are Colorado's regulations concerning a body coming into the state or out of the state? With embalming requirements?
Colorado.
Just repeat the question.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. What are the regulations about bodies being brought into the state? The Colorado is one of those states where I feel like the laws are very supportive of freedom of religion and freedom of, it's a very, in some ways, very kind of libertarian state in some ways. And so there are actually no real regulations that protect us from bodies coming in. They don't have to be embalmed. They have to be kept cold, but not frozen, but just cold. They do not have to be embalmed. And so we have bodies brought in from Arizona, from Ohio, from all kinds, from places that don't allow these practices. People bring the bodies to us, and we perform the service. And
So the regulation is on the receiving state.
yes, and there are some states where they do have rules, like the body has to be embalmed, and I don't have these which states are memorized, but each state will have its own their own rules. And just to give you sort of like a glimpse behind the curtain, is there's this book, it's called the Red Book, and it has all of it's kind of like the yellow pages for the funeral industry. And they have like an appendix at the back of the book where it says what each state's regulations are.
In terms of the, conversation about natural reduction and Jewish tradition, the piece that is, it's the length of time in which the body is out, but not in the ground, between death and burial. That seems the most just troubling to me, when you're talking about looking for ways to increase that. And in a way, you brought the ground above ground,
Yes.
so you can, there's a good Jewish argument always has loopholes.
Right. And even though most of the material is wood chips and straw and alfalfa and organic stuff, it could be very easily to have like dirt floor or dirt mixed in, so that the body actually is in contact and covered with dirt the entire time. Again, that sounds like a loophole, but it's if somebody wanted to sort of fulfill that mitzvah and still do this, there'd be ways to accomplish that. And whether that could still be called burial or not, it's not for me to say, but it's a way of doing things.
The shifts in terms of providing burial and burial markers where you don't have the entire body that needs to be buried. So we want to talk about some what we had one congregant who used the cemetery, private cemetery.
7 stones.
Exactly, which has these, additional options. Maybe you can say a few words about that.
Yes, there's down in southern Denver, near like the reservoir, Chifield Reservoir, is a botanic garden that also serves as a cemetery. And it's gorgeous. And it's like really elegant, and sculptures and trees. And they have all kinds of additional options of burying just the ashes, or burying in the body in just a shroud, or different. They also are very open-minded and accommodating of what a family might envision, and they really do focus on creating a very beautiful place where the body could be visited. And I think that they perform a wonderful service on behalf of families that want that location. And it's a beautiful view of the mountains, of course, from there.
So they have, like around a tree,
Yeah.
6 different plots around a single tree, and then a post next to the tree that has a plaque with a name and, birth and death dates, or whatever you want to put on the plaque, but a small, maybe a 4x6 kind of plaque around the post. So I guess it was 4, one in each of the directions. So you could be on the west side or the north side or the south or east, right, of the tree, and sort of part of this sort of tree sundial.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course, regular burials and burial plots, full-size burial plots in that same area. I may mention we're still in the process of trying to have a Jewish cemetery up here in Evergreen, and looking at different models, and like that as an example.
Yes.
Other questions about the processes, right? We have the scientists in the room, around, who, around the natural organic reduction or natural reduction, even composting or the water cremation, to understand what those processes are, because, even though they may be ancient in terms of how long variations have been doing that. They've only become legal and practiced in Colorado, on the leading edge of the country in the last couple of years. So if you were part of a pandemic or something, you might not have heard about it. Other questions about those two processes in particular?
I need a little clarification. Is natural reduction the same thing as composting?
Yes,
Oh, it is, so there's,
and I've used natural reduction, natural organic reduction, and body composting. I'm all talking about the exact same thing. I'm sorry about the confusion.
that's all right. So the water cremation,
And that's the same as alkaline hydrolysis
okay,
and water cremation are the same thing.
okay.
Or aquamation?
Or aquamation, and
Yeah,
aquamation also, like water cremation, some funeral homes said this is what we want to call it. And just, between us, I think that cremation literally means destruction by fire. So
Yeah.
even though we call it water cremation, if I voted against that, but I lost the vote.
yeah, particularly in Jewish consciousness of crematoria,
Yeah.
places of,
Mhm.
that. So yeah, I use aquamation, or
Yes.
alkaline, so,
And that's a much shorter process than.
Yes.
yeah,
It's
that's,
a few hours. And also, by the way, the National Cremation Association has sort of, and most states that have legalized it have defined it as a form of cremation, even though in some ways it's kind of like the exact opposite. Let's see.
Lauren, go ahead.
Yes, we don't have a funeral home here in Evergreen. Would you like to have a funeral home here for us?
I thought you did. I thought you do
No.
have.
There's no funeral home in Evergreen.
Okay.
I think the friendly amendment to that is that the Evergreen Memorial Park, which is the cemetery in this, by
Mhm.
Marsdale, they function as they make arrangements too, so they function like a funeral home.
But you have to go down the hill, right?
I don't think so. No, I don't think you have to go down the hill, but there are other concerns about working with that organization.
Right, and we need to have a place to have taharas.
That's right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have done Shmira there at their, but it's not it's like the basement of a room. It's not set up like the National Funeral has this lovely space for sitting with the body and accompanying the body.
And we've modified our what we call the receiving center to be appropriate for real tahara. So it's like sinks and water and everything that would be needed for that particular ritual. And we are flexible. We could come up here. We probably won't open a natural funeral here in 2023, but you're on our radar, and we'd love to be a service to your community.
That's nice to know.
We might be able to get you an office downstairs. Put a plaque up,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes it small.
Nice, let's see. Okay, well, that is.
I think Irv had more question.
Okay.
How is a green burial different from these two processes?
Yeah, green burial is, I'm going to first by explaining how green burial is different from conventional burial. Conventional burial, they dig a hole 6 feet deep, as you know. They take these cement liners and they line the hole, they place the casket in, they put a lid on the vault, and then they fill it up with dirt. And then they put a giant marker on the stake. And with green burial, it's differentiated in several different ways. One is to start with the hole, it's shallower. It's only about 4 feet deep in green burial, and that allows for more biological activity. It's not, the soil has more tree roots, it has more moisture. It speeds up the reabsorption of the body. There's no vault at all. Sometimes there's a plain pine box, sometimes it's just a shroud, sometimes it's like a willow tray, things like that. Those are things that make up a green burial. And then the marker tends to not be this large object. It tends to be a flat on the ground marker, so that you're not disturbing the view, the landscape. It becomes more like prairie in this part of the world, or forest if it was somewhere else, or that it's an attempt to commemorate the life by having a marker, but in a very humble and unobtrusive way, visual. And the intention is not preservation. The intention is reintegration. So that's some of the difference between green burial and conventional burial as practiced in our society. And
Just a quick question on, so the plain pine box in terms of that traditional custom, many do consider that part of a green burial.
yes,
You didn't include that, but
oh yes, for sure.
Yeah.
In fact, that's very frequently our green burials have a pine box that we work with a carpenter in Longmont, gets beetle kill pine, makes us the box in the traditional way, and so.
With no metal, the traditional Jewish burial has either shrouds or just burial in a sheet, or in a plain box that has no metal in it, so it decomposes. So that's considered green.
Wood
Yes.
pane.
What's that?
That's okay.
No nails,
No nails.
no hinges.
No nails.
No nails, right?
No metal, yeah, no nails, no little pegs, wooden pegs to hold it together, and right.
Does a cemetery have to be licensed or?
Yeah.
To do both types of burial?
Well, cemeteries definitely need to be licensed, and there's a lot of regulation around what is a cemetery. There is, and then different cemeteries have different rules. So some cemeteries require these vaults, or require that the body is embalmed, or whatever rules they have, and other cemeteries are can allow green burial. The one here in town, the cemetery allows green burial, and we've buried bodies here.
In the Bear
Yes.
Creek Cemetery,
Yes.
or in the Evergreen Memorial Park?
Evergreen Memorial.
Okay, you should visit the
The Bear
Bear Creek Cemetery.
Okay,
And
next
they
time.
don't require vaults, so they're also permitted,
Mhm.
permit green burial.
Great. It's different cemeteries have different rules. And I mentioned about burying on private land. That's that varies, but the rules vary county by county. The county coroner decides whether it's allowed or not. Some counties are anything goes. Some counties are very strict. They tend to have, there's usually a component of law enforcement involved, where the sheriff watches that the burial occurs. It's recorded at the GPS or the county assessor. No one wants to find the body later and start a whole homicide investigation. So there's, but, and it can't, the body like can't be close to water, can't be in a, or this or that. There's different counties have different rules.
Right. Well, I think you've exhausted the questions and certainly not exhausted the curiosity and interest in the topic. So Dan, thank you again so much for coming up, especially in the weather, and bringing your expertise and engaging us in this topic. We will continue with the series. We've been meeting on the first Wednesday of every month. Next, the first Wednesday of next month, I think, is Erev Pesach, so Passover. So we will not gather on that usual time. At least you can have a taboo topic at your Passover Seder table. In fact, that would be traditional.
Yes.
But keep an eye out. We are looking at starting at the end of April, a series of classes on racism and unconscious bias. And it'll likely be, Marilyn Sussman, who was on with me on earlier with her, there will be organizing that jointly with the Judaism Your Way and Kabbalah Experience. And there'll be probably a series to talk about racism. And I'm also going to try to fit in a conversation about Israel, Palestine, since that's been in the news and is certainly on our minds in the coming months. So keep an eye out for that. All right. Thanks so much. We're grateful for your
Thank
time.
you very much. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.